Okay, good. Okay, now we're going to look at reading comprehension. And this we touched a little bit on yesterday about reading groups and how to help facilitate some of those groups and why that's significant and valuable. But I also wanted to mention reading comprehension, and that specifically relates to how to introduce a book. So the point of reading, or like I said yesterday, the point of that is to actually go somewhere. There should be a point for our reading. And I want to give the background for understanding how people understand and where some problems with reading comprehension can come in, okay? And things that you might encounter and things that you have probably struggled through yourself to some degree. I know that I did, okay? Anna much more than I, but I know that I struggled through that because in my BCC or in my Bible school, all I learned was how to learn. Okay, obviously I learned that Paul went on missionary journeys and a few other things, but honestly, the biggest thing that school gave me was the ability to learn, right? And that's powerful. Like, how many years? I was 21 years old. 21 years old, and I didn't know how to learn. Okay, I went to just 2 years ago only.
Wow.
No, just kidding. Just 1 year ago, no. Okay, so, yeah, just yesterday.
I think you just picked up her favorite student.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's so true, right? Just a year ago. So these are some of the things that people have to overcome, or that we have overcome, okay? And things that will be important to consider, okay? First of all, fluency. For anybody who speaks a second language in this room, fluency is an obstacle, right? Just knowing what the words mean, pronouncing them, being able to read it and understand in another language is difficult. But what if you're not necessarily fluent in your own native tongue? Okay, that's also challenging. And some people are not at a place where they are fluent to read, okay, out loud, where they feel comfortable and safe. And a lot of, if you receive any students with learning disabilities, this will be something that you will encounter, okay? So we had a student who had dyslexia. He was aware of his dyslexia. He asked, can I still do the course if I have dyslexia? And we said yes, but it will also be challenging for you. Are you willing to work through that challenge even though you have dyslexia? We will assist you, but it also will be challenging. So things with fluency we're talking about also some of these learning challenges like ADHD, dyslexia, some of those things that come into play when looking at education. They're valid, they're real. Some people have been labeled and it's not real. Some people have been labeled and it's very legitimate, okay? Not that we're going to tell anybody like you're not legitimate or any of those kinds of things, okay? If the student tells you that they have these issues, we need to understand that this is one of the problems then with reading comprehension. And when you get together in a group, you may need to assist them in a different way than everybody else, okay? So one of the things to help with fluency is to talk about it. Yeah, how do you feel where you're at with this? If, you know, like I'm an ESL, how do you feel like you are in your proficiency at this? Do you feel comfortable? Would you prefer to do it in your native tongue? Do you need to step out and do it in your second language, right? Those are all the questions you will be having and assessing probably in some of our first groups in next week or the week after, whenever school starts, right? These are some of those things impact reading comprehension, okay? Also, sometimes something that impacts people when they're reading is their eyes jumping around or like not being able to flow and see the next line and flow, right? That's what I mean by eyes jumping around. This is actually quite common, okay? You get lost. right? You're reading and I lost where I was. Okay? Everybody's had that experience, right? Everybody's had that experience. Some people, that is actually a regular thing. Okay? They actually have a hard time following the page. That's very simple to overcome. Use your finger, right? Use a piece of paper or a ruler or something that you can help guide yourself through that, okay? That might be something that people struggle with. Make a recommendation in the beginning. Hey guys, if sometimes you have a hard time following along, I like to use a ruler or I like to use my finger. I already mentioned that to you guys a couple days ago. Do you remember? I said, for me, to help me stay engaged, sometimes I use my finger so that I don't get lost, so that I'm physically engaged, right? That helps involve my kinesthetic aspect, right? And I'm listening, but I have to engage my visual by using my finger, right? So it's holistic in including some of these things. If your eyes are jumping around, people get lost, they have a hard time focusing or paying attention, make a suggestion. Use your finger, use a ruler, use a pencil, use something to follow along. Also, in the skill of learning how to read for yourself, if you're one of the speed reading skills that they teach you, not reading out loud, but just for your own knowledge, speed reading, if you take your finger and move it down the middle of the page, your eyes can see both sides of the lines, and you can read line by line if you practice that. That's so hard to do. But anyway, again, the finger is an important tool, is why I'm saying that in reading. Okay? Vocabulary. This is where we get a little embarrassed, like we're reading the Bible and I don't understand what a word means. In order to read, so the high school equivalent level in the United States is a certain amount of words. I can't remember the exact statistics, but in order to read the Bible, you need a higher level than they give you in school. Okay? And if you want to take it to KJV, right, if you're going to old school, you need another additional 2,000 words. Okay, so sometimes we're asking our students to know things that maybe they don't know vocabulary-wise. That's not a problem. What we need to do is we just need to say, hey guys, if you see a word that you don't know what it means, in this time, because you're in this school and we really want you to understand the Bible, let's ask those questions. I don't know what propitiation means. Okay, who uses that in a normal sentence? Nobody, except Bible teachers, right? Okay, and you're reading and you run across propitiation. That's an appropriate time to encourage your group. Let's stop and ask that, hey, I don't know what propitiation means. Totally wonderful part of your small group reading. Okay, vocabulary, getting explanation on some of these words, encouraging people to ask those kinds of questions. I don't know what this means. Yeah? So important. If you don't know what it means, that's okay. You know what? I actually never really looked up propitiation. I just kind of assumed. But we can look it up together and then, right, everybody's learning together. And that's great. So it doesn't mean that you have to know all the words. It just means if you don't know one, maybe you would look it up too so that you can anticipate the students might not know that. And, oh yeah, I had to look that up last night too in preparation because I knew that was coming in Hebrews or whatever, right? And then you go through that. But really, people get embarrassed that they don't know what the meaning of a word is. Oh, I'm an adult. I should know what that word means. Who says? Who says you have to know what that means? Right? So let's create an environment where people can feel safe to ask those questions. Another one is a low logic and reasoning. This was my main problem when I came in for comprehension. I didn't understand how to use words in logic and reasoning in literature. Okay? I was really good at being mouthy. my logic and reasoning skills in that capacity, right? But I was not necessarily good at looking at the text and coming to logical reasoning conclusions based on what I saw in the text. It was a skill that I needed to learn, and I had that's because I wasn't trained how to learn. In school, I came in with this low capacity, okay? The way to overcome this is to keep doing it, right? To be deliberate, to keep practicing, to go through actual steps, which is the inductive method. That's what helped me so much, is that there are actual steps, there's actual things, I got clarity on what actually does main idea. What is a main idea? I don't really even know. How do I find that? How do I find an idea? Right? I didn't even know how to find an idea. So how am I going to reason with ideas and logic with them and follow a train of thought if I don't even know how to identify? Right? And so this is some of the technical aspects. And I also find that I'm not alone in that place as a young person coming out of a high school education. Perhaps a lot of our young people might be at this place. We don't have the capacity to think through things. And so in order to help people, we need to create an environment, again, where they can say, I'm still not getting it. Can you please walk me through it? And I think that's where the collaborative learning, which is what I valued so much, that I kind of did secretly on the side in my BCC, because I just couldn't figure it out, but other people could figure it out. And if I could see them, I could learn it, right? I could copy, yeah? And so the collaborative group learning through these things and helping people, this is a main idea, guys, this is how we get a main idea, this is where it is, and I may not like get it right all the time, but I want you to know that I'm learning how to discover these ideas too, and so let's walk through that, and other people can contribute, and that collaborative learning that you're doing in the small group, that will help this so much. That's why collaborative learning is so important, because it helps us think through things. Maybe some people are stronger at this, and it can draw other people into that. And it was so helpful for me in this way. When this takes place, if you're low logic reasoning, it means that you're more concrete, and some of the abstract ideas are more difficult to understand. And so things that you'll encounter in the Bible that are abstract are like figures of speech, symbols, double word meanings, some of those things that aren't so clear, that are abstract, that you have to like pull from here, here, and here, and then put together to make that idea. That's a bit harder, because these people are thinking very concretely, yeah? And I can still see sometimes in other areas of my life, I'm so concrete still, because I haven't developed that aspect in that particular area. Whereas you might think, how did she ever have that problem? Because she seems very reasonable. Well, I've had to work it through and practice and practice and practice and practice to expand that, right? So understanding that this just takes practice too. It's a stretching. It's respecting the corners of our brains and exercising them. Okay, and then the last one is visualization. Some people have a hard time seeing things. Visualization is so important in interpretation, right? Being able to visualize or put ourselves in other people's shoes, or being able to see crossing the Red Sea, or, like putting yourself in the story. Visualization, some people have a hard time doing that, and therefore they're not able to grab that information and say it again, right? They can't see it. So I'm like that too. I need to see something, and then I'm like, oh, I can do it, right? And so you can practice this as well. And visualization basically means recalling the information. So like, what I picture this being like is, so I'm asking my small group, okay, in this chapter, what is the main idea, right? And so in my mind, what I'm doing is I'm looking at that page visually, in my mind's eye, I see this is the left side of the Bible. Right? For some people, like, I never want to get rid of my Bible because the left page is where that information was in this book, or the right page is where that is. It's right on the halfway down. Right? I visualize that. It doesn't mean I have any idea what it says. I just know where it's at. Right? Because I can recall that. And so stopping and helping people visualize maybe an outline or okay, this page. Let's pick this left page. That's the main idea of this page. Let's pick the right page. It's the main idea of that page. May not always be the most useful, but connecting it to something visual can help. Okay, so these are some of the obstacles. And the reason that these are obstacles is because people don't have directed reading. Or they have, these things can be helped through direction and through reading for specific reasons, right? So for example, something that helps with reading comprehension is setting goals for the reading. Yeah, setting goals for the reading. So for example, one of the main goals that I want for my students in my small group is I want them to understand the big picture of the book, right? The main idea. Okay, so if I prep them, in the beginning, I would say, look, the main idea of the book is this. I want you to look. So Genesis, main idea of the book for Genesis is this very thing. Okay? I want you to look for that as we go through the book. I want you to analyze the text, not necessarily like detailed, but I want you to analyze how could somebody come up with that idea. That's the main idea of the book. So in the beginning, we're not asking them to discover the main idea. We're telling them, this is what the main idea is. Look to see how somebody may have come up with that. So that there's a goal, so that when you ask them, what's the main idea of a book, they've already thought about how a main idea is formed. Right? So there's a goal. We have a goal for them in reading. We want people to be able to give main ideas. We want them to be able to summarize like a passage of scripture. We want them to be able to see God's redemptive plan, right? So if some of your goals are main idea, we want them to discover. Or in the beginning, we want to just tell them and then ask them to look for it, right? We want them to, God's redemptive plan. Hey guys, love the book of Genesis. Let's look at how God was moving in Genesis. Take a pencil. You guys colored, right? God's redemptive plan, things like that. In our first reading, we're going to read Genesis all together. In this first reading, here's the main idea. I want you to look for the ways God's moving. So take a color pencil, and as we go through, just highlight where you see God moving in this book. That's a goal, right? It's helping them read analytically for comprehension. There's a goal. So when you're just reading for reading and you have no goal, there's no discerning. There's no reason to be pulling anything out. There's no outline making in your mind. There's none of that stuff. So giving people some things, some goals to discover or to see as we're going through the text begins to teach us how to read and actually understand. It's so valuable. It's so valuable. I can't tell you how valuable this is. Also, what you're doing when you're introducing the book is you're giving them the genre, right? And that tells them how to read. Yeah, it helps them consider how to read this book. If it's a letter, it's different. If it's a narrative, it's different. So when you're explaining genre, it helps overcome a lot of things because they feel empowered to know how to read this book differently. And you will begin to explain that, hey, this is a Old Testament narrative. In the Old Testament narratives, there's 3 levels. There's the big level with God's redemptive plan. There's the nation of Israel, which we'll see starting in Abraham, right? And then there's the individual levels. So Abraham himself and his story, right? And so what you're doing is you're telling them how to read this book. how to understand, and it really helps them. And oh yeah, God's the hero. That's why we're highlighting what God is doing, because in a narrative, God's the hero. It's awesome, right? How to help them read their book. Okay, again, helping them how to use the background information. So we're giving them historical context, but how will they use that as they're reading? Okay, which information are you giving them? Telling them how that information is useful when you're reading. Yeah, when we read about this empire, this is what they were like. You know, and that brings that visualization, helps them begin to visualize, helps them begin to connect the history with the text. So we're trying to prep them in that way. Or trying to help them understand the setting, visualizing the setting of the book. And also helping them reflect. So after we prep them with these things in our intro, then at the end of our time reading, we want to reflect. We want to go back, go through those things again. We want to reflect on what else did you see in the book, right? Maybe what are some other things that stuck out to you? What are some other ideas that came through? How was God the hero? How did God move in this book? What did you highlight? What did you see? So what we're doing is there's deliberateness in reading. There's a goal. It's not just read whatever you see, then you say something. Oh, I've had this burning question for years on this. Okay, that might be important, but we're also giving them goals so that we have a directed conversation at the end. That's not just whatever, whenever, however. Does that make sense? I think that this will really help you as a reading group leader to teach people how to understand the text in such a way that they can then begin to learn how to ask observation, interpretation, and application questions so that they can move through the process of the text for themselves. Does that make sense? If you teach them what to look for in the beginning, show them what's there, they can then they can copy that. And they can model that, right? They can then model that at the end of the school when they introduce books, because that's what they're going to do. Questions? Anything I forgot? Other barriers you can think of?
So I know certain students that apply have learning disabilities. How do you cater to that, and then catering to other people that are, I guess, more equipped to learn in a group setting?
It just depends on the severity of it. So this guy that we had that had dyslexia, it was quite severe dyslexia. So then we had to do a lot of things with him orally. Not because he couldn't learn. Totally could learn. Brilliant guy. Just couldn't write it down. Right? That was his problem. It was all here, and he frustrated in putting it onto a piece of paper. Yeah? Which is, could you imagine being stuck inside your body like that? Oh, it's so painful to walk alongside. And so we would adapt what we were doing to, okay, look, tell me your process. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you hear. Feedback to me. And so it just depends on where they're at, and that's where you as a small group leader need to, if you have somebody in your group that has a learning disability, you have to go research that, and you have to ask them, specifically the people, where are you at with this? What is this like for you? Where do you struggle in learning? How have you been helped in the past? How can I help you? Or what, as we go through this, we might have to figure out some alternative ways to do things. And that's your job as a small group leader, to learn those things and to be able to help them succeed in that way.
Okay, another one. A lot of people come with ADHD these days. How would you cater that with this reading comprehension?
Again, giving them like things to do. I find, or giving, like just having like a little ball. We often provide stress balls, or those like tactile things for people because they need to move. and it's helpful if they have something. Like, it's not just a tactile thing, it's also I don't know how that actually all works. I would ask them as well what they've done to help themselves, because oftentimes some people have been diagnosed and there's been nothing done to help them. It's just labeled, now figure it out. And so there's some wounding, educational wounding related to that, but there's also people who know how they operate and know what they need to do, and then we just need to say, look, if you need to get up and pace in the back of the room, then get up and pace in the back of the room. You know what I mean? Let's try to do this in a way that's not so distracting, or that really facilitates you in your learning. Again, I think it's just asking a lot of questions of the particular person instead of just saying, yeah, I don't know how to help you, and you don't know how to help yourself, so guess you're just gonna be stuck in that cycle again. Do you know what I mean? But it is a growing problem. Can you please add anything?
Since we've been talking, one of the things, just generally speaking, is engagement. The issue of engagement. Even like, I've been in sessions as a teacher, and they say, oh, well, people need a focus shift every 7 minutes. Every 7 minutes? You gotta be kidding me. 7 minutes, and we got a focus shift. We spend most of our time focus shifting. Because they said because TV has taught the generation to have a focus shift every 7 minutes. My answer is actually no, they need to be discipled to focus for longer than 7 minutes. That's how I feel about it. And I've got to work with people. ADD and ADHD, I'm not saying it's not a real issue, but I'm saying that sometimes when someone gets that put on them, they have disqualified themselves as well from being able to do something more. And that's a discipleship thing. And it's also you believing in them that will change them forever, actually.
Yeah.
And that you can encourage them, you'll walk alongside them, and you'll help them. But engagement is a big deal, just generally speaking. Part of my issue when I had my lack of reading comprehension was engagement. I didn't know how to engage with the text. I would read, and I can read, and had no idea what I just said or what it said, and what I realized was I wasn't engaged with the text. And it is a internal exercise that I can't help someone engage with the text, but I have often had lots of conversations talking to people how to engage with the text, how to be present in the text, how to put themselves within what's being said, how to relate to it. And some of these things, when we set them up with what we're intentionally looking for, what happens is we set them up with things to engage with. And so even someone who has a poor ability to stay focused for a long time, they can continue to go to something that helps engage them over and over and over again. And so being intentional in reading, from my experience, has helped with engagement and getting people to focus for longer periods of time, making it purposeful, because sometimes when you're reading and they're just like, oh, we're just here to read this book. So I'm pretty much checked out until we get done, because then we're done. Do you know what I mean? But there's no purpose in the middle part of all of that 2 hours for them to engage with. Yeah, and so I think that it will help in that too. And so I just wanted to highlight engagement in the generations. Like even when I started leading Bible schools to this last year has grown.
The lack of engagement.
It's been shocking for me to watch how much of a problem it's become bigger for people to engage and have reading comprehension because they're disengaged within life in general. So then they become even more disengaged with an educational process, if that makes sense.
Which is what really they want, which is why they're following in groups to be connected and engage. And they really want to be engaged with the Word and God. Really, honestly, it's our want, right? How many, like if I ask the question to how many young people want to be engaged with God through His Word and engaged with one another in that process, right? My hand's up. Okay, but have I ever been disciplined to do that? Do I know how to do that? Have I been disciplining myself in engagement? Right? And so again, it's not necessarily like a magic formula, but there are things that we can do to help each other. There are things we can do to help people engage, and that's where these setting goals and focused movements through the text help us do that. And we're doing it in a group setting also helps do that. Yeah, good. Thanks, Hannah.
So they're intentional.
Intentional.
But they're not limited.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean like we're doing these 5 points and then that's all we're looking at and that's all we're going to talk about and that's, do you
No,
know what I mean? That
not at all.
completely defeats the purpose.
All it is doing is giving some focus and some direction. Where that leads, bring on the Holy Spirit, right? It's awesome. But we want to have somewhere where we're going to help people get there. Yeah? Any other questions? That's good, Leah. Thanks for the input. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't know that this was so helpful for me, and I wish I would have known it a long time ago. And so I hope that you can equip these guys with this stuff because it is so powerful, and it is so, maybe they've never been engaged this way before. I know that I had never been engaged in learning like this before. But I see so much the benefit, and the only reason I'm standing here being able to explain it to you today is because I walk through it. It's been so beneficial in my life. Other questions, thoughts, input? Other group experiences? Can you reflect on previous small group experiences and see how this would impact them? Okay, John, tell me how.
I mean, last time, like there was, I felt like the teaching was the same what we were getting in the small group, so it was like repetitive, like context, historical things like that. And so the way it's structured now, of them delivering two different avenues of learning is really good, you know. And so it's something like this, then that's like I don't have to talk about the historical context of the book or go in depth because the lecture's going to do it.
That's right.
We can hit other things like the main ideas and GRPs like that.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Other thoughts from your experiences being either a student? Chris, I would love to hear what you think because you were a student before.
I think this will also help students to become, own their learning a little bit more. I remember even just, I don't know, I was not a good student, but you know, the Nelson's books and charts, maps and charts were given to us. But I only referred it just to find, because we needed to come up with, use two other sources. So it was just a resource to just find what I needed. But, you know, it does have so much more information. So, you know, being able to really be intentional in, as a student, the coming students, they have really deferring to them to own that learning process here. It's not just a resource to pull out a liner or two, but the information is there. You could come to class prepared to understand what the lecturer is going to say. And that's gonna lead into the small group. So they are getting the context, you know, multiple times, so that when they really sit down to read, or, you know, maybe it's the first time, so it's prior to the lecture, at least they have read it and they're hearing it from their small group, so that, you know, that they really get to own what they're going to be reading for. So, yeah. I think it's good.
Anyone else?
Process, like
Yep, so, yep, that's where I'm going next. I just want to make sure everybody was on the same. Good. So then what this would look like, ideally, and this is where we still need your input. on if this is actually gonna work. But the idea is that, so for example, they would read the book, which means that when we read, you intro the book, giving them things to look for, yeah, helping them understand some of the historical context. Then they go into the lecture, having read the book. What?
I was thinking the intro, but then also at
Review,
the end of
yeah.
reading the book, you're highlighting major themes, observations, big picture. Do you know what I mean? So they feel like they've left the reading group, read the book, but also have some major observations to understand.
Yep. And understanding, hopefully, the big picture. Right? Ideally, understanding the big picture of the book. So you're introducing it, they're reading it with this, we review, we talk about some of these things, they get the big picture, they get God's redemptive plan, or at least how God is moving, they begin to see that. They maybe come up with some of the main idea or some of the themes that are prevalent in the book, and then they go into the lecture and get fantastic, excellent teaching on this book, right? Deeper historical context, all that stuff. I've never been in a DBS lecture, so I'm not sure exactly all that they get, but they get a great understanding or a good platform, right, for some of this stuff. And hopefully the lecturer is modeling how they got that information, right? So what we've asked the lecturers to do now is not only tell us really great things about the book, but also model how they came to some of those conclusions. Okay? So not just knowledge. Knowledge is great, but how did they get there? Because every lecturer will have a different way that they got there. So all we're doing is reinforcing that everybody has a unique way, but they all come to similar outcomes. They go through a process. They have a process, I have a process, you have a process. It's okay, right? There's different ways of doing things. And so hopefully that will empower the students to realize there's not only one thing, one right answer, one way. It's the process, again, that we're trying to model. And so ideally they're going to be then helping us with that. Some teachers are naturally gifted better in that way, some won't be, and that's okay too, because it just shows the breadth and depth of the way God uses people, right? And we want that. We want all of those things. We want people who are incredibly knowledgeable. We want people who are incredibly gifted in skill. We want all of those to be demonstrated and expressed throughout the school. So then they get the lecture, right? And then we have our small group. And the first part of the small group is again discussing is full on discussion about all this stuff. Okay, so hopefully they've moved through, they have the big picture, they have some deeper understanding here, possibly some interpretation in the lecture, which can help us then have some discussion points where we can either draw from that observation into interpretation. If there was some interpretation and application in the lecture, we can draw from that and we can actually then begin to really dialogue and discuss. Okay? And then after the discussion, we'll go on and do our next reading at the end of our small group.
Which means it would be introed.
So introed again and reviewed afterwards. And so that's why small groups now, they might take a little bit longer. Okay? But the whole point is to provide dialogue, space to think about, to discuss, to ask some of those questions, and to move towards this application, right? So here they have that whole process: observation, interpretation, application, and those things are, again, maybe doubled up. Observation and interpretation here. Maybe not, maybe just observation again, interpretation here, and application. I mean moving to principles. So not necessarily, the small group can have times where people will process something that they have received, like a revelation, like, oh man, I never realized, right? And then there's that immediacy of, wow, that's powerful, the Holy Spirit's moving. Okay, but the idea is not necessarily to have that every single time. We're not like wanting to pound, that kind of application. What I mean is we're drawing them to a point of reflection, right? There's principles. We're showing them where the principles come from in the text. So by application, we're getting them to a point where they are able to consider by the end of the week all these principles and then take that and actually apply something specifically to themselves. Does that make sense? That's the idea. Okay, this is how we envision it working. We'll see. Want to do this together? Let's try it out.
I think it would help me if you gave like a specific book. So let's say
Philemon.
we're in, okay.
Or Genesis.
Well, I was thinking, yeah, like say we're reading like Ezra or something, right? And where exactly are you putting? So we read Ezra, and then we have a lecture about Ezra, and then we come back and we discuss Ezra, and then the reading, is that then Ezra again, or is that Nehemiah?
Nehemiah.
Okay, but what if you're kind of in, like this happened last year. Sometimes you're in the middle of the week and there might be smaller books, and just with the schedule, what if they're already giving interpretation of Ezra before we've actually observed Ezra and read it?
Yep, that's a possibility. We tried to organize the reading schedule so that it would be prior to lectures.
What I understand the point of a lecture and where we're trying to is to cover a biblical era, not a book, first of all. The lectures aren't to cover the books because the DBS is covering time eras. Right? At the end, we're going to have this time period. We have an overview of it. We understand how the historical background of that era. We understand what God did during that time. What I understand the model was previous was they actually were covering this book, this book, this book, this book.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually an SBS model. But this isn't SBS, this is DBS. And so that's not actually what we're wanting. We're not wanting the students to be able to give me an overview of every single book of the Bible. That's not actually the heart of the DBS. The heart of the DBS is that the student can give me an overview
Of the time
of the
frame.
time period and of the Bible as a whole, not every single
Part.
book. See? And so something like that, we don't know how it'll go because it's a transition that the lecturers, we've asked them to be more reflecting on the time period, but I don't know how they're going to come in because their experience previous was
Different.
every book.
And a lot of the speakers are
So-
SBS speakers.
So the idea, for instance, practically Genesis, we're going to read Genesis before the week starts. We come in Monday morning, they give us an overview of, that time
Pentateuch.
period, Genesis, hopefully some historical background. That afternoon we go into a small group and we use all that to have, maybe it's not a very big discussion because we haven't covered enough in lecture yet to have a lengthy discussion. That's where the small group leader has to actually understand what's actually helpful for right now. Well, let's talk about these things. Let's pull out these majors. Let's make sure we all understand, because it's about understanding and making sure that the students are tracking and understanding where we're going. And then maybe it's time to move on to read, which should be exciting. If we're talking about all the stuff we just got out of Genesis, it would be exciting to get into Exodus as well. It's not just a list of reading books. We're actually in the middle of a story where we got this whole historical background of this time era. And now when we go read Exodus, we have understanding as we're entering into this next book. And there's so much more we can get out of it because of our understanding. And so that's actually the overall goal. So it might not work exactly, but I think it's, again, this particular school, it's going to have to be a trial and see. But that's where we were going with it. So Andrew and I are going to Boston, and we're going to help teach. And we were talking about, okay, we're going to go and actually teach. How could we model what we're looking at? How do we cover the whole time era, right, for the students, so they can have a discussion and so on and so forth. And then when the passages come into play, this morning we talked about passages. That would go in your actual discussion. You would say, okay, you'd summarize where we're at, and then you'd say, okay, guys, we're going to actually look at chapter 3 specifically together. You get into it. See how they have all that background and historical context before you get into the passage. So when we were practicing that with Philemon, there's so much background they have to pull into that study time with them, if that makes sense.
So, like, ideally, in a given, like, are we having like 2-hour small groups? Is that kind of?
I think we've lengthened them to 4 because we need, in order to read the entire Bible, you have to have approximately 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, because of the 11-week.
3 hours, 1 to 4.
1 to 4, sorry, 3 hours. 1 to 4. We wanted to lengthen the opportunity for discussion, but we also realized that there are 2 hours of Bible reading. And we needed to decide, okay, let's make a framework for how this would possibly work. Let's try it, and let's give the small group leaders, the staff, the capacity to be flexible in that. So like you show up in the afternoon, everybody's ridiculous, exhausted, it's middle of the school, it's hot. We give the school leader, okay, you have 3 hours, you need to have a discussion, what needs to be covered for the week, you need to read this stuff. Maybe you can say, hey guys, let's go to Starbucks and read this, let's just push through. Or you can say, guys, what's best for you guys? Can we do this tonight? Or you guys want to have a little bit of a break? Come back tonight. Will that facilitate making sure that you are able to complete all that you need, the homework, the reading, and so forth and so on. And so what it does is it hopefully provides the capacity for the small group leader to know where we're going, to know what needs to be covered, to know how we cover it every day, and then to be able to be flexible in that system and to be able to lead as they would lead as an individual, not as just meeting some objectives. It's how that you meet the objectives is up to you as a small group leader. How your style of leading, how your group is working, how fast they're working, how much they're comprehending, how deep they can go, so forth and so on. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of room for all of that because you know where you're going, some of the tools on how to get there, the time frame that you have, and what will be required by the end of the week, as long as you get there. Choice. But we wanted to give freedom for the discussion because that's where we were really missing. It was only Bible reading, there wasn't enough space, and there wasn't. The discussion is intentional to help meet some of those objectives. Discussion, teaching skill, but discussion on leading to points of application, drawing it out of the text so that these guys can change and they can experience life change, they can experience the change in the Bible, they can experience growth and so forth and so on. And that's why not every day has to have application. The whole point is by the end of the week they have some things, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 10 to pick from that they can say, man, this has really impacted me this week, right? And then they are growing and maybe the following week it's the same thing that's still impacting them. I'm still blown away. We were in Kings with David, and then here I see the implications. I'm still blown away by, right? So there's a continuity of growth because they're seeing the story. And so in the big picture, they can actually be impacted by the big picture as well as the details. That's part of the idea of that too. Because that's why we do the whole week and look at it as we're moving in this direction for the week.
You know, the reason I suggest in the beginning of our meeting, the lecture pace need to maybe set up with a small group mode for discussion. You know, during the lecture, if we have just something and we can just talk chat together. Yeah?
Excellent.
And
Yep.
So I just wonder, it looks like the lecture pace is like same with what we did.
Slightly different.
So
Well, we
how's
also
going-
have talked about the intentionality of
Yeah.
leaders. So, for instance, Angie
Angie
at
and
the end
Chris.
of class, getting feedback at the beginning,
of
getting
class.
feedback.
Yeah. Beginning of class.
Summarizing at the end of class on what the small groups are going to be talking about.
So
after
here-
lunch when they meet. For people that need a little bit more time to think through how they can contribute in the small group, right? Because for me, I would need a little prep. So if my school leader said, okay, after lunch in your small groups, we're going to talk about covenants. We're going to talk about how significant covenants are. Then for me, I have a whole hour to consider. How are covenants actually significant and important? You know, I mean, stuff like that. Is also how we're wanting to lead intentionally within the lecture part.
And also potentially the small group leader then can prep them as well for the week because they know where we're going. And you can say, because some people need more time to think. So you can say, look, tomorrow we're talking about a specific passage. Tomorrow we're talking about worldview. You know, be prepared. Just give people the vision for what's coming for those who need more time. And yeah, so it'll be important for these guys to bookend the lecture. So we're giving them more space at the beginning and more space at the end to help facilitate that. And then also on Friday, what we're going to trial is discussion, feedback, workshops. There's not a formal lecture. So no one's going to stand up at the front and give a lecture. We're trialing the opportunity to do something a bit more either creative, like a workshop, so we're in Paul Week. On this week, we go out up to here because somebody's drawn a map of the first century world and we're walking through Paul's missionary journeys. And dialoguing and discussing and talking about what happened here. You guys remember, look at how, and then we started over there, and now look at where all the churches are planted, and maybe somebody's got things that they planted, right, as we go along, and then we look back and look at, wow, look at what, so there's opportunity for different styles of learning and expressing the same thing. It's still giving input, but maybe also we need to sorry?
It also leaves room for how about
Yeah.
God's doing something in the school.
And we need
do
application.
need to have an application
Corporate.
as a corporate group.
We have time here for that. We have time for different small groups to come in and be like, yeah, this week God was really doing blah, blah, blah. And this other small group, yeah, and they get to share. And maybe there's more community building time in that way. So the idea is to create space for corporate processing, corporate exercises, corporate things that contribute to community and contribute to discussion and help bring some of those other things out. That's what we're trialing. Yeah. So when Yo was like, we need more space for small groups, I was like, yes. Where is it gonna come from? Right? Where are we gonna get more space? Well, we need to create it, right? So we deliberately are going to trial this to see how it will work.
And the speaker will be there
The speaker will come. Yeah, they're not absent. They're there
because they're part of the community.
and they're contributing still. Just not formally.
Yeah.
It's more informal or non-formal, non-formal learning.
Because you said the space, I just thinking about some funny things. Students also naturally has the ability to make a space by themselves.
Yeah.
So what I saw that they want to make a space for their own time or their plan. So they started the homework before we do go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because the next week I have a plan for that, or my parents will visit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they just do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah, totally.
that is, we cannot deal
Yeah.
with that, but just I wanted to say for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And what we can do is we can actually give somebody to look forward to something that's coming up. Like, we're going to go, blah, 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 something that is connected to that week. And it's a different style of engagement in learning. And that's where the community, I really feel like the corporate community comes in, because we're in our little small groups, but it's opportunity for the mixing and mingling and corporate activities to take place. Did you want to say anything else about that, you guys? No. So we're still figuring out exactly what that looks like and how this is going to work. Again, this is the idea, but we're trialing it. Yeah? And it may not work, and it may work awesome, and it may be rough in the first few weeks, and we need your feedback on that.
I think it's good. I'm wondering how are we being strict on like a 3-hour block, or is it okay? Because I'm just personally, like, I'm totally honest. Last year, 2 hours a day was tiring, especially with all the homework that we did and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know about other people's groups, but our group, we managed to have a bit of conversation, discussion. Probably averaged out to be maybe like 15 minutes, a small group. So that amount, I'm wondering if like maybe like 2.5 hour small group might be good, or I don't know, maybe we could have 3 hours and then see how it goes with each.
Yeah, we're trialing it. So the reason that we've included an extra hour has to do with this focused discussion portions. You will need more than 15 minutes to work through a passage of scripture through observation, interpretation, application. You will need to have a discussion on worldview more than 15 minutes, because we're wanting to, there are some things that are only covered in small groups. Specifically, they're a small group discussion purposefully, because we want people to learn in that community, in that small group setting. And so my understanding is that I understand how that worked last time, and I understand why it was like that, but I also understood that it wasn't helpful ultimately. And yeah, people were tired, but my understanding with this is if we are engaging deliberately in all of this, you won't have a problem, or you will have less problems with some of those complicated things like I'm tired. If you're deliberate in your getting them understanding your reading, it is going to be mentally tasking, but it'll also be very exciting and very encouraging, because people are growing and they're seeing how they're developing their skills week by week, and they're also seeing how that's related to the text and how that's transforming their lives. And so the more deliberate we are, and the more we can cast that vision for this is what's coming, this is how it's going to work. Remember, like we were talking about, you guys carrying the heart of how this is actually transforming people's lives, and continuing to model and give that out, instead of like, man, last time, I was so tired, I didn't even want to have a discussion. That's not the model we're hoping to instill in this time. We're hoping that these connecting all these things together and being deliberate is really going to bring a lot of life, and therefore it won't be as dragging. Will there be times where I'm assuming people are going to be tired? It's a full-on school, but this is a university second level course. I think they can handle it. We want to draw people up to that and draw them into excellence, draw them into loving God in this way, draw them into being disciplined with their time, draw them into honoring God with their whole life, and giving space for them to be able to work through that, giving space for people to be able to give time to God, specifically to hear Him in their reading, and so forth and so on. So again, the value of this is to create create space for God to come and move, to create deliberateness, to help them learn how to actually withdraw these things, to create to teach them the inductive study so they can see where their beliefs come from.